Now, Reece, the next question we've partially already answered before, but I'll still throw it towards you in case there's anything else you want to add to it. How
Sure.
do you determine and prepare for early and late developers?
Yeah, I mean, again, part of it is somewhat assessing has the kid already developed physically? Have they gone through puberty at a young age? Because sometimes they grow early. We go, this kid's massive. Look at them, but they've already developed fully. By the time they're 13, and then you look over at their parents, and they're 5'10". So the kid's already 5'10", but that's what the parents are. So, it's highly unlikely that kid's going to be. It's not saying it's impossible, but it's highly unlikely that kid's going to be the 6'7" beast you want them to be. So sometimes you can assess from things like that. I think there's an important thing to consider, particularly with under 12s and under 14s. Relative age effect, I think, is something to consider, and something I always wanted to know in terms of selections with our under 12s teams, under 14s, was when were the kids born in the year. So you consider under 12s, a kid born in January versus a kid born in December is essentially a year older, but they're in the same age group. So the relative age effect is essentially that kid's a year older. So he is or she is going to be more developed physically, most likely, than the kid born in December, but they're in the same age group. So sometimes considering that as well, because a lot of times we'll pick all January and February born kids in those younger age groups, but by the time it gets to 18s and stuff like that, it's balanced out. So I think it's also trying to not get kids to specialise too early as well. I know, particularly from my experience in Victoria, I think I got told that there was these five different under 12 players at different times that were going to be the next Australian Opal or Boomer. And, I don't even think they play basketball anymore, and they'd only been under 16s because they've burnt out their parents put too much pressure on them. They put too much pressure on themselves from a young age. From 9 years old, that's all they did was basketball. Play 3 or 4 games, 5 games a week, do extra trainings, get training from this coach, from that coach, and eventually they end up just hating it. And just wanting a break. So I think that's maybe a slightly different thing, but not pigeonholing kids too early, that this young kid that's really good is going to be the next superstar. Because a lot of the time, again, on a similar note, that kid that's a 9-year-old that's a superstar at 9 has probably just played more basketball than the kid that isn't developed yet. So there was a girl that was a really good 9-year-old player in the association with, quite skillful, wasn't that big or strong or anything, but very skillful. I think she'd played something like 500 games of basketball by the time she was 9, and because they were keeping track of it, the parents. So of course she's going to be better than the kid that just started playing 2 weeks ago. But will she be better by the time they're in 16s? Probably not. She probably won't be playing. So there's some things to warn against. I tried to educate those parents on that, but they told me I was wrong. There's some things to consider, but there's no exact science with talent ID, because there are some that specialise early and develop early but still go on. But generally speaking, I think basketball is more of a late developing sport.
Tim, is there anything you'd like to add to that, mate?
No, that was a terrific answer, especially around that. And that's a kind of another discussion about allowing, what kids who do other sports. There's a little window there about, and I think there's a whole bunch of studies.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on that.
A lot of stuff on that area, and kids that specialize versus kids that have experience with lots of sports. And I reckon all the coaches here online could immediately think of some players who are across a number of sports, and that really was great for them.
Yeah.
And they bring that game awareness and that sensory game sense to basketball.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting area, and it's also one of those things. Again, when we're picking teams, this kid does this thing. You think, I know that, and like I was saying before, they love basketball, but do they you think, oh, well, they don't love basketball enough. Well, that might not be the case, but
Yeah.
you've got to know the difference between that. You know, it's like, well, actually, they do lots of other stuff, but they do love competing. They
Yeah.
do love, they do love challenging themselves. They do give everything their best. So I thought we're gonna strike plenty of athletes, young players like that in our trials.
I think 100%, you consider a young kid that plays rugby or AFL or something, they're going to bring some toughness, you would think, and some certain attributes that are going to help you win in basketball games, rebounding, screening. I mean, I've got a couple of guys in our school group that aren't full-time basketballers. Their probably preference or their focus is on other sports. But I tell you what, that rugby or AFL skill set helps us win basketball games, screening hard, like one of our guys had 17 rebounds, in a game on the weekend, and he just reads the flight of the ball extremely well. It's like he's taking a specky every time, and he hasn't played as much basketball as other kids, but he enjoys it. He works hard, he competes, and he helps us win. But that's a different context, But I do get there is a point where kids have to specialise if they want to be really good. If they really want to be good at a sport, there is a point where they have to, but it's not as early as we think. Generally speaking, it's it's a lot later on than most of the time we think, and that would be my advice to anyone that coaches is sort of encourage the kids to balance other things and yes, enjoy basketball. But for some reason we think, well, it's rep basketball, it's the biggest thing in the world, and it's like, well, they're 12, they're 12. Like, let's let them play the other sport they like, and as long as they still commit and give their best effort with us, and we make them fall in love with the game, well, they'll probably stick it out and they'll have got better for it. And then if they've chosen to stay in it because they wanted to, not because they were forced into it at a young age, because you have to commit to this, you have to commit to that, you can't do anything else, they're probably going to stay in it longer because they enjoy it and they love it and there's that motivation to do it. So it's their choice, they've got autonomy. I think that helps.